Hi, my name is Jason Pearson, and I'll be talking about MotionLayout and RecyclerView today. You can find me on Twitter after the talk if you have any questions, and also in chat. So I want to take you on a journey. It's going to be an animated journey since it's about motion layout, so I'm going to have this little guy to help. And along the way, what we're going to do is essentially build this animation that I'm about to show you. In a recycler view, you have view holders. And one of the harder things to animate with a recycler view is an animation like this, where you tween between a list view and a detail view. And also going back out of that. Now, the way previously to do this type of animation might have been in a shared element transition, but I'm going to show you how to do it in motion layout. In order to do that, I need to tell you a story about where we were 2 years ago. We had a complicated layout with a coordinator layout and a recycler view. And this was not only complex, and it was also hacky because there were very custom things that we were doing to the different attributes at runtime. We were doing some reflection, and it also was impossible to animate anything in that little top bar other than the default behavior of the toolbar resizing text. Next, we had a shared element transition. Whenever you liked content in a profile in Hinge, we did the shared element, which grabs the bitmap of the view that we're animating, does some exclusions on the nav bar, status bar, and some other elements on the page, and does some delays, then fires a bunch of animations through Transition Manager, which are all fire and forget. They can all error. They can all have bad things happen. This is hacky and limited. And then our design team came to us and said, oh, that's nice that you have these limitations, but we need to animate even more because we're going to redesign the entire app. And that was a very interesting moment in Android at Hinge. So what to do? We could, conventional wisdom was saying we're maybe animating a little too much. Is Android just not good enough to do this kind of UX, this intense stuff that seemingly works easily on iOS? And maybe having a little existential doubt. So around this time is when I met John Hoford and Hoford Roard and talked to them about motion layout at Android Dev Summit back in 2018. And essentially grabbed them for 3 hours after their talk and said, hey, these are the challenges I'm seeing. These animation systems that are existing are not meeting the needs that I see. Like, there are more things that we want to do. And what you're doing in motion layout is exactly the kind of stuff that I want to do. You're making hard things look easy. How does this all work? And I talked to them about it. I learned a lot from those conversations. And I also talked to them about some of the recycler view things that we were trying to do. And they said, oh, hold on, just like wait a little while and we'll get back to you. And lo and behold, in February, they had this. It was a motion layout and recycler view demo that they posted on Twitter on February 8th. And about 7 hours later, because I've been following them, I said, I'm so excited to try this. It's exactly what I was looking for. And this ticked all the boxes for what we wanted. It had scrolling support, for whether you were talking about nested scroll view or recycler view. It had coordination. You can not just have one custom interpolator, which was kind of hard in other animation systems, but you can have an interpolator on a per view basis at different points during a transition and control all of it. You have gesture support out of the box. Never before have I thought so little about how an on-swipe transition works, and therefore am freed up to think much more about making the animation really polished and look really good to users. And finally, very important, is it's motion layout is designed to be interruptible. I don't just mean gesture interruptible. I also mean the actual animation or transition is interruptible. If we wanted to programmatically switch out a transition and go to a completely different state, there are things built into motion layout, especially once they got to its stable release, that allow you to programmatically just move to a different transition. So this all sounds amazing. How do we build it? First, we need to look at the requirements. All Android engineers have to deal with configuration changes, even if you lock your view to portrait mode, like Hinge does. Sorry, Google. But another configuration change that everyone has to deal with, especially us in our use case, is keyboard, especially if it happens in the middle of this sort of animation, which it does for Hinge. Another thing is flinging, being able to fling and not just swipe from one item to the next. When I looked at their demo, and their demos since, I noticed that it was usually swiping from one item to the next, not necessarily flinging. So this is when I was like thinking to myself, oh, maybe I need to look at RecyclerView and figure this out on my own. There is no documentation to do this yet. Another thing was scroll position. In Hinge's use case, we had view holders that are partially off the screen, and we still need to animate them just like this. And also tween back properly. Another thing is that our view holders in our use case are completely different sizes, sometimes different kinds of content. Some are text, which are actually really hard to animate in a shared element transition and not do text wrapping or make look good. Another thing is we have images and we also have streaming video. This gets pretty interesting. So what are the different solutions that we came up with? We had evolving approaches. I'm going to walk you through the one that we essentially rolled out to production last year. Along the way, we're going to grow to better things. But first, there was creating placeholders by hand. I'm going to build this layout with different view holders with you. This is going to be our photo view holder in our example demo app. And this is going to be our text view holder, just two text views and the one image view, the other view holder. And now looking at our main activity layout, I'm just going to have a frame layout. I'm going to pull over the component tree. And I'm going to add a recycler view to this. And I'm going to add a constraint layout. I'm going to later convert this to a motion layout, but I want to show you how to use your knowledge to build constraint layouts before we get to actually working with a motion layout, because Android Studio has a cool tool of converting constraint layouts to motion layouts. And next up, we have the overlay. And this overlay is going to be what we use to darken the screen. Next is the photo placeholder. This is going to be the destination or the target for when we animate a photo in our recycler view. And we'll also have a text placeholder for our text animation. Now I'm going to show you how Android Studio actually animates or converts a constraint layout into a motion layout. You just right-click on a constraint layout inside of a component tree, and you can click this to convert it into a motion layout. You hit convert, and it converts it for you. Now, what actually changed? There are a couple things. So one of those things is the tag itself. The tag was constraint layout, and now it's motion layout. Next is this little bit. Now there's an ID there. There wasn't one before. We didn't write one. Android Studio wrote one by default because when you are building a motion layout, you absolutely need to be having IDs for everything. especially to reference your motion layout programmatically to do animations or trigger them. Another bit is the layout description tag. This is MotionLayout's way of referencing motion scene files. And because we didn't have any name for this thing, it wrote a pretty crazy long ridiculous name for that motion scene file. Let's change both these things to names that make a bit more sense for our purposes. And also we're going to click into this main scene. Now, if you look at this motion scene file that we just opened, you'll see a couple things. There's the motion scene, transition with keyframe set inside of it, and two constraint sets, start and end. I'm going to clean this up a little bit. I'm going to get rid of the keyframe set because we're not going to cover that in this talk. I'm also going to reorder the start and end there. There just makes more sense to me that way. Start at the top and at the bottom. And I'm going to replace the XML namespace from motion to app. This has no effect on anything the motion layout does. It just makes more sense to me, especially when I'm going back and forth between a motion scene file and a layout file. Finally, I'm going to rewrite those start and end constraint set names to list and detail. This just makes more sense. And also, if I have many different motion scenes in my app, I don't want every single one to have the same IDs for its start and end states. Note that you can have many different states and many different transitions. We're just having only one because this is a pretty simple animation, it turns out, for MotionLayout to do. Now, looking at the detail view, or detail constraint set, I'm going to add this constraint. And essentially, this is saying, one second, let me hide myself. Essentially, this is saying to motion layout, apply these attributes in these layout attributes, these transform scale attributes, and these property set attributes. Now, the three things that are the most important here are the vertical bias layout attribute that actually changes where this view will be positioned on the screen to be 35% from the top. The transform attribute says, essentially, scale this view down to 90% of its normal size. And the property set says visibility mode ignore. I'm not going to get into all the different properties motion layout has. I actually have another talk that I did last year that does go into detail with all these different things. Visibility mode just says motion layout should not try to apply a visibility attribute to this view, whatever it thinks it should be. The way motion layout actually works during an animation is it's constantly applying the attributes it has in its memory model to the views, to its child views. One of those attributes is visibility. And if you allow motion layout to apply visibility and you try to manage the visibility of the view programmatically outside of motion layout, you are in for a bad time because motion layout will just set it to visible if it thinks that the view should be visible. Using this visibility mode ignore, you can get around that. Okay, so looking at the activity again, we have this motion layout file, motion layout bit, and I'm going to pull it over to the design view. And I'm actually going to run this little transition. And this is what it would look like in the motion editor if you ran this. Now, this animation that we just ran, as you can see, it didn't transition from one of the starting states of these view holders. That's because we haven't written the code that's going to do that part, and because that's in Kotlin. Last thing that we need to do in looking at the activity is we need to add a little bit here that says Android visibility gone. We actually want this motion layout to not be visible the moment that the activity is loaded. We actually want to start with a recycler view and hide the animation layer that is going to perform this animation. Also, the motion layout is clickable and focusable. So when the motion layout does become visible, you won't be able to click or fling or do anything to RecyclerView. So for this next part, I'm going to show you a bit of Kotlin. We're going to use view binding in this example, along with Kotlin channels and a placeholder source view binding that is nullable. This will allow us to throw a reference to an active view binding being used into, so it can be referenced at some point later. Our onCreate is pretty straightforward. All that's really happening is we set the content view and create an adapter for our recycler view. In onResume, we just subscribe to the flow of clicks that will be happening. And on each click that comes back, we're going to try to grab the view holder from the recycler view using my wonderful little extension function and match it to the position that we think we clicked. Then we're going to run this function called onWidgetTapped. Essentially, this bit says, if you clicked on a photo view holder, hide the text placeholder destination. If you clicked on a text view holder, hide the photo placeholder destination, and grab the view holder, the placeholder that you're actually going to use. Then this extension function I wrote saying enter placeholder. This is how we're going to actually operate on the placeholder animation. And we're going to then throw the placeholder source, throw the view holder's binding source into placeholder source so we can use it later. And this is the place that we'll use it later. If the user hits back and wants to exit this detail view, or if it's not null, then we're going to run this other extension function called exit placeholder, which literally just says, cleans up a couple things around visibility of the motion layout of the original view holder. And then after it's done running this little completion function, I have will say placeholder source equals null, and this says motion layout transition state list. So now we have a fun motion extensions file. Inside of this, first we're going to create a bitmap from the source canvas. This sounds a little familiar to the shared element transition. When I was making this last year, I basically got as far as replicating the same thing that the shared element transition was doing, but it actually operated faster, had fewer out-of-memory crashes, was generally a better UX, and the animation was much more customizable. We'll come back to this later. Next part was calculating the placeholder constraints. I'm not going to show you that code. Essentially, if the view holder in question is off screen at the top of a page, or to the left or right or bottom, it can calculate that and then create a constraint set for this placeholder view in its starting state to exactly mimic what the view holder's placement is. It then gives that into profile state as a constraint set. We call update state. This is a function on motion layout. And remember, this is an extension function for motion layout. And we give that as the starting state. We set transition. This is another default function on motion layout, non-extension function. And this says, make the transition this starting state and ending state and set the progress to 0. We then make the motion layout visible. We make the placeholder that's going to move visible. We're going to set up a after transition listener. This is a custom extension function that I wrote, and I can show you the code. I'll be posting the code on my GitHub later for how all that works. And then we run transition end. We tell the original view binding, not necessarily view holder, and that's important. We tell that original view binding that its root alpha should be 0. So essentially hide it once this animation is on its way. And so when we made this animation and released this to production last year, we essentially saw there was no delayed transition, which is a wonderful thing. We went from 100 to 200 milliseconds of a delay and a pretty weird, funky thing that didn't do everything we wanted to an animation that did everything we wanted, except for some downsides. This was brittle. It was not reusable. It was created by hand every single time. We had to copy each attribute or copy a bitmap over, and that's the inefficient part. This little to-do was sitting there for a very long time. Very, very inefficient. Please fix. Thanks, past self. So now we're gonna, around this time last year, I was talking to Nicholas Roard at droidCon SF, and he was talking to me about different ideas. And one of them was using RecyclerView internals to detach and use view holders in MotionLayout temporarily. This is an interesting idea, either from using it from the adapter or the layout manager. What did that actually look like? Well, I don't have an example for you because I didn't get very far with it. One of the main downsides for Hinge's use case specifically is that we use exoplayer in our view holders, and that means streaming video, which means surface views. And if you've ever tried to animate a surface view, you quickly find there's lots of difficulties. So I don't think this could work with exoplayer. And also, if you've noticed, there's lots and lots of Jetpack Compose talks at this conference. I think that seeing that there is no recycler view in Jetpack Compose, we could better spend our time in other methods rather than creating a recycler view dependency in MotionLayout and then have to refigure this out later. So next idea, which actually occurred to me while I was making this talk, and you'll remember before I was talking about how MotionLayout actually works when it runs an animation. It says, hey, all of my child views, this is my memory model, these are your attributes. Next frame, this is my memory model at this frame, these are your attributes. So I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about this problem, and it occurred to me that it might be possible to use MotionLayout's own internals for copying attributes in order to solve this issue. Because essentially all we're trying to do, is copy everything from one view into another, and MotionLayout copies things from its memory model into the view on screen. Now, I haven't gotten that far with this idea. So what I did do is I created a demo application, which instead of using MotionLayout internals necessarily, I just took this code, this extension function that says apply binding to placeholder. Note that it does not say view holder, it says binding, because I wanted this to work with view bindings because that is the future of UI on Android, at least until Jetpack Compose gets here. And I essentially took this extension function and I said, okay, instead of copying the bitmap, you're just gonna look at each view and copy attributes over, whether that's text from text views and all the different attributes that come with text, or drawables from image views, etc. And I wrote those parts by hand. This is essentially what MotionLayout does under the hood, though. So this is what that looks like. I made this demo this morning using that placeholder code on an animation that I also created by hand. And I just replaced all of the code that would normally be copying either attributes or trying to copy it with a bitmap to my new code that does this. So I can use this code either on the vertical transition stuff or on this new horizontal, completely different animation. And I'm able to create this in the space of an hour or so. So the benefits of this, there's no delayed transition again. The destination placeholder is already inflated. You don't need to inflate it. This is robust and reusable because I can take this code and apply it to lots of different use cases. I don't necessarily have to be talking about RecyclerView even. And whether it's efficient, well, it might not be completely the most efficient thing, but I think this is efficient enough for now. If someone can come along and do something better, that'd be great. If someone can do the layout manager path, that could be more efficient and better in some use cases. So, this is Motion Layout, and it's pretty powerful and awesome. And when I started back in 2018, this was kind of my face a lot of the time when I was working on animations. And there was this grind loop that I kept going through. And I kept going back and forth between wondering how this worked, this magical, crazy thing before Motion Layout, and then going back to thinking about how can I solve this problem? Every problem can be solved. All we're dealing with is pixels on a screen, right? So Motion Layout can help you break out of the constant grind and get to a place where animation on Android is actually a fun thing, and you can prototype things in interesting ways and come back to design and be like, oh, you wanted this thing to flip in this crazy way. Well, I can do that now. So with that, I've got lots of time for questions. Not seeing any questions yet, I think. Oh yeah, totally. So if you go to that, so that link that I have right now on screen, that bit.ly link, if you go to that or that QR code, it's the same exact thing. I have a GitHub page. Right now it's blank because I kind of ran out of time uploading stuff, but it will be up there, I promise. Just check in an hour or so. I'll also be posting the keynote for this talk. I think it's fun to make animations, whether you're doing Motion Layout or Keynote. And if anyone's curious about how you make animations like this, just happy to share the keynote. I've used MotionLayout to build a custom component for other. Yes, actually. So one of the interesting things that we've done is not just in our profile view or in different more direct like views, but also in our entire onboarding flow. You can see when you sign up on Hinge that at the top of onboarding, there's this progress indicator. Every bit of that is Motion Layout. And it's a very simple, small thing, but it was a lot easier to build because we use Motion Layout for it instead of trying to get either a custom Lottie file or something else, or try to draw on Canvas for the progress indicator. And would you recommend Motion Layout Network? Probably move to Compose. Compose looks awesome. I've been holding off on Jetpack Compose because of how much I've invested in Motion Layout, and now I'm seeing some really amazing animations in Compose. We're probably going to experiment with Compose sometime next year, and what we're going to do is try to look at the hardest to do animations and try them in Compose first, and that's how we're going to move forward into Compose. Once we can do the hard things, that's when we adopt something. By the way, another thing that we use Motion Layout for was the gender identity screen, which was amazing and wonderful to do. It essentially made something that was just text input and a list of options into a wonderful experience that was easy to prototype, and we made it in like a day or so. How can we stay in touch with you? If you follow me on Twitter, I am active there. So my little Twitter is @Kawick down there, and I respond to DMs. Feel free to message me. If you go from RecyclerView to detail, shared element, or motion layout, and make an orientation change, backward. So I'm actually not doing shared element transitions with motion layout. These are just motion layout transitions. They're replacing shared element transitions. And the wonderful thing about motion layout is once you have a transition set up like this and do all those constraints programmatically, all you have to do is back out of it and say transition to start, or transition to the state that is the starting state. You don't have to build the backward transition, which is amazing. So it seems like your motion layout only appears during your animation. Why not use it and animate it when it's clicked? Or did I misunderstand? Let me see. So I don't think I understand the question. So let me explain what was appearing on screen. There was a recycler view, and one of the view holders, if you tapped it, it would then make a motion layout transition. The one motion layout transition was just like moving into a certain spot on the screen and then moving back. When I was showing that really cool card flip transition at the end of my talk, that essentially there was a recycler view that was horizontal, and you could swipe from card to card in an infinite list. And when you clicked on one of those cards, a motion layout appeared and then showed the placeholder in question as well as the card. And then when it was sitting in that card transition or a card destination, you were constantly seeing motion layout on that white card, on that white side of the card. When it flipped back to blue, that was still motion layout being displayed all the way through until the moment it came back and rested at blue, and then you were seeing a recycler view again. I hope that answered your question. If it didn't, please feel free to post another one. And I've actually got another 8 minutes, so if anyone else has any other questions, feel free to ask. Some other fun things that we use motion layout for, there are some weird moments where we get a design that's a little bit too tall vertically, and we don't have enough scroll space. And normally you would just say, okay, I'll just throw it in a scroll view and be done with it, and the user can scroll on their own. In Hinge, we actually use motion layout to do a little pull up to see like info or whatever else was being added to the screen, but we don't have quite enough space for. And motion layout has an automatic auto transition animate to start that you can fire without even programmatically firing it. It just can be written in XML. Animation that you showed still seems very daunting. Where do I begin learning about motion layout? I am so glad you asked. I have this other slide here. This was a talk that I gave last year. And I also recommend, there's a bunch of blog posts by Hoford Roard. If you've never looked at motion layout before, I'd recommend starting there. And once you're done with those blog posts, if you just Google Hoford Roard motion layout, part 1, you'll start there and continue. Things have changed a little bit since then. If you run into any issues, I recommend watching my talk, because I walk through a lot of problems and issues and concepts of understanding motion layout, all the way from little building blocks all the way up to more complex animations. Can I give you an example where I use keyframing animations here? So pretty much every motion layout animation inside of Hinge does use keyframes at some point or another. Things like elevation changes happen at certain points, or alpha changes happen at certain keyframes where we hide something at the end of a motion layout transition. Another example, I'm trying to think right now. The other thing is moving the alpha change. If we're going to like 100% opacity to 0% opacity, there are some animations where we actually don't want 50% opacity in the middle. We actually want it towards one side of the animation or another. You can use keyframes to say, make this view appear at this moment in the animation. So like maybe 75% of the way through an animation, a view suddenly will pop in or fade in as appropriate. We actually specifically do that for elevation on our Discover view. The header becomes elevation 2 or 4 at the end of it once you push it all the way up. In your last demo, what happens if there's other views visible on your screen? Do you need to hide them? Good question. That last demo actually had the original recycler view inside the motion layout, whereas the other demo that I showed had the recycler view as a sibling of motion layout. I used the motion layout to tell the recycler view about 75% of the way through the animation that it should start fading out. And by the end of the motion layout transition where the card was flipping, you'll notice that the two cards that you could see kind of on the sides that were kind of small, they faded out. Also in that demo was each view holder had its own tiny motion layout, which was resizing each view holder in a scaling animation. And I was just using the scroll position and the offset, and the offset from the center of the screen to update the progress of the motion layout transition of every single view holder. So when you got to the center of the screen, you were at 0% progress. When you moved away by 100% of the width of the view holder size, then I would update the view holder's progress to be 1. And as you scroll, the variable width between the two would affect it. Is there any callback to which let us know the animation ended? Okay, so I'm actually going to exit my slide. Hopefully this works and does not kill everything. I'm going to boot up Android Studio for a second. And I'm actually going to show you part of the project that I used to build some of these animations. Okay, so you guys can see this, right? Yeah. Let me just make myself go over here. By the way, shout out to fun little bit of software that made this possible. That's the thing that I'm using for doing this. So anyway, so you might have noticed that I have, how do I zoom in on this? Can I make this font bigger? How do I make font bigger in Android Studio? Doing this live right now. 5 demos are great. Oh God, that's not right. Just bear with me for a moment. So anyway, the thing that you're looking for that callback is motion layout set transition listener, and you can listen for something on transition completed, transition change, transition started. They work exactly like you'd expect. But motion layout would make some apps slower and some smartphones used a lot. In my experience, it's more performant than shared element transitions, way more performant. So I did notice there was one beta version, I think it was like beta 5, when it was rolled out. We tried it. We tried to roll out with it, and we noticed some out of memory crashes. Since then, we have rolled out to production MotionLayout 2.04, and that doesn't seem to have issues in terms of performance. How do you design your killer slides? So I made them a keynote. Thank you. And I will post them later. But essentially, lots of shapes and lots of magic move. There was a blog post I read by Jake Wharton years ago, and when I was just getting started as a conference speaker last year, I was like, oh, I should reread this and try to use it. So that's how that happened. It looks like we're at 5:40, and I think that means that we're done with questions. So if there are no more questions, and that's it, then I'm happy to answer more questions if anybody has any. I'll stay in here until they kick me out. Thank you. Cool. Glad you guys enjoyed it. Y'all enjoyed it. If anybody needs the slide with the link to this, I'll also post this on the talk speaker notes and blog. Jamia Partner at Work or on the app. I met her on Hinge, and she's amazing. We're married. We got married this year during COVID, so it's pretty amazing. And yeah, she's in the background, and she's been helping me build this entire thing and giving me reviews and helping with advice on different parts of the keynote. So it's just wonderful. Okay, I'm getting a. Any more questions? Can't wait to try this. Hi, Patrick. Patrick is my coworker at Hinge, and he also has built a lot of really fun things in MotionLayout. If you actually, inside of Hinge, there's the abuse report flow. Don't actually report people just randomly, but if you want to see his work specifically, go into Discover, hit report. Don't actually report people, but you can see this wonderful bottom sheet pop up and the RecyclerView transition between different states. And he built every inch of that, and it's wonderful. We also got to reuse that component for how we do when you do video calling inside of Hinge, there's a terms of service thing that pops up, and we got to reuse that entire component for that, and it was just super easy. Dumb question, can this be used transitions between activities? Yeah. No. So if you'll notice that I don't have two activities, I don't have two fragments. I am actually constantly displaying the same activity. I'm just showing and hiding things on top of it. I'm not sure what I've done should be made into a library. Essentially, it's just a list of extension functions. Now that MotionLayout is on Android X and it's open source, maybe this could be a pull request on top of it if Nick and John would like it. I need to reach out to them. now that I've given this talk, now I'll tell them what I've done. I hope they like it. Do you reference repo for all some of these animations? So if you look at if you follow the link that I have over there, either the QR code or that bit.ly link, I will be posting the code that I was using for this up, so you'll be able to pull it down and run the animations yourself. I'll also be posting the keynote, so you can also see the animations inside of that RAR. Any recommendation for activity transition? So I would actually not recommend transitioning between activities. If you've adopted navigation component and you want a shared element transition between two fragments, that is way more performant than shared element transition between activities. I investigated the fragment shared element transition as well, and that could work. It can't work for our use case for this type of UX interaction. We have just way too much going on in between two different screens in the animation itself. And we need to be able to seamlessly back in and out while animating about 20 or 25 different things. And doing that in shared element is just not really that feasible, and I wouldn't recommend it. You either need to give up on animating so many different things, or you need to use motion layout in this specific crazy way, or you need to think of a different way of organizing your UI. I really hope Jetpack Compose makes this kind of animation much easier, and then people won't need to use motion layout in this way. I am kind of doing this a little bit. Nick, when I showed this kind of animation to Nick and John, they looked at it and they were like, we never intended for anyone to use it like this. This way of showing and hiding the motion layout in yours do smoke and mirrors animation. That was not something that, when I showed it to them, they were like, we had no idea we were going to do this. So I think we're coming up on time. I don't remember when the end for this is, and that's why I keep saying